This video is going to be about the carbon cycle, as we can see, which is the most important cycle to understand in biology. And we've actually already talked in great detail about two aspects of the carbon cycle this year, and that's photosynthesis and respiration. But that was a while ago, so we're going to review that, and then we're going to look at how the carbon cycle fits into all of the ecology with food webs, etc. And then we're going to look at how humans are impacting the carbon cycle. Photosynthesis is the creation of sugars that most autotrophs go through using energy from the sun. So what plants do, and this happens in the chloroplast, remember, is they are able to take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, water, which they obtain through their roots, and then they use light energy from the sun, that's the photo part, and with that they make glucose molecules. So here's where our carbon is coming in, right? Carbon in the carbon dioxide, carbon in the glucose, and they also produce oxygen molecules, which they release into the atmosphere. So most plants do that. That's an awesome thing and very beneficial for humans and all animals because most animals are aerobic and rely on oxygen. And then most organisms, plants included, go through cellular respiration, which happens in the mitochondria of eukaryotic organisms, and that's the breaking down of that glucose. So that's when the glucose molecules, remember, are broken down with the help of oxygen, if it's aerobic respiration, to produce ATP, energy source that is going to be used in the cell. And carbon dioxide and water are byproducts of that reaction. So in humans, we then exhale the carbon dioxide because we don't want it. So we talked about respiration, right? When we get oxygen into the alveoli of our lungs and then into our bloodstream, which brings it all around our body, and then the carbon dioxide being produced in all of our cells through cellular respiration goes to the alveoli and then we exhale it. But this happens in plants and lots of other organisms as well. So all of that carbon is being moved from the atmosphere into plants, into animals, into other animals, and back into the atmosphere. What we can see here is the natural carbon cycle. So we have carbon dioxide from the atmosphere going into a plant through photosynthesis. That plant releases some carbon dioxide through respiration, but plants take in much more carbon dioxide than they release because most of that carbon is going to be used to make new tissues. So we can see all of that in these carbon compounds that are made by the plant. Those carbon compounds can go from a plant to an animal when an animal eats it, then to another animal, and to another animal in a food chain or a food web. All of these animals, just like the plants, are going through respiration and releasing some carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Carbon also goes into the soil when animals die and decompose, or they produce waste, which is going to decompose. And so we get carbon compounds in the soil as well. And then even the soil and all of the microbes living in the soil does release some carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, which we can see over here. So this is kind of our natural carbon cycle. And with this natural carbon cycle, carbon dioxide levels remained below 0.03% in the atmosphere. So very small percentage of the atmosphere is actually carbon dioxide. It's mostly nitrogen and then oxygen. But a little bit is carbon dioxide, but kind of had a nice balance for the most part in the past millennia of carbon dioxide going into plants and then slowly being released through respiration. This image of the carbon cycle is much more accurate because it shows both the abiotic and biotic components. The last one was mostly focusing on how carbon moves through living organisms. But now we can see that carbon is also found in a lot of other places. So we have 4 major places where carbon is stored. There's the atmosphere up here, which, as I mentioned, is a really small percentage of the carbon. There's a lot of carbon stored in the ocean, and the carbon in the ocean and the carbon in the atmosphere goes back and forth through a process known as diffusion. Okay, so it can go back and forth, ocean to atmosphere. A third place, which is the one the previous image was showing us, right, is biosphere carbon storage. So that's the carbon stored in living organisms. And that will include soil, it will include trees, all of our biomass, and this is where photosynthesis and respiration and decomposition comes into play. There's also aquatic biomass, right? So part of the ocean carbon store can also be considered to have some aquatic organisms like phytoplankton, which take a lot of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and convert it into sugars and food to support the ocean food web. And then our fourth carbon store is the lithosphere, the land. So that would be carbon that's stored in limestone and in our fossil fuels. And a lot of those fossil fuels were produced, well, all of the fossil fuels were produced 65 to over 100 million years ago. So the big impact that humans are having on the carbon cycle is that we have been burning all of these fossil fuels in a process known as combustion. So I'm going to add that word over here, combustion, because that is one you should know. So that is when we burn fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, mostly to generate electricity or to power our vehicles, our cars, fly airplanes, heat our homes, right? Anytime we're doing that, we are releasing a lot of carbon dioxide that has been stored below ground for tens of millions of years, and now we're releasing carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So what is happening with all of that is we have actually increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere so now that in the highest points in the year, it's over 400 parts per million, which means that the atmosphere is now about 0.04% carbon dioxide. Sorry, I'm writing that with a highlighter rather than marker, so let's try that again, which is 0.01% higher than it used to be, which may not sound like much, but carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. And this is why we are seeing global warming or climate change, because the Earth's temperature is going up with increased carbon dioxide. And we'll talk more about that very soon. But the other thing to remember about the way that the biggest impact humans are having on the carbon cycle, in addition to combustion of fossil fuels, is also deforestation. Because remember, we talked about photosynthesis and how trees and plants take in carbon dioxide. Well, when we cut down a whole bunch of trees into clear land for cattle to graze or to build houses, etc., then all of those trees are no longer taking in carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. And as they are either burned or slowly decay, they release more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So that is the carbon cycle. And we'll talk more about it. Don't forget it. It's a really important one.